Get out. You don't belong in my house.
I'm sorry, sir. Daniel invited me.
Daniel invited trash. You reek of poverty.
I'll keep my distance, sir.
Shut your mouth. People like you crawl in because you smell money. Choose her. And you're no son of mine.
I choose her.
Gracie.
Minutes later, a black car rolled through it. The man who stepped out was about to bring this billionaire to his knees.
Get out. You don't belong in my house.
I'm sorry, sir. Daniel invited me.
Daniel invited trash. You reek of poverty.
I'll keep my distance, sir.
Shut your mouth. People like you crawl in because you smell money. Choose her. And you're no son of mine.
I choose her.
Gracie.
Minutes later, a black car rolled through it. The man who stepped out was about to bring this billionaire to his knees on his own marble floor. But who he was, and how one guest could topple an empire, no one in that room had any idea. 2 hours earlier, the night looked nothing like a disaster. The Anderson estate sat above the Connecticut shoreline, all white stone and tall windows. Candlelight spilled across the marble. A string quartet tuned in the corner. 200 guests drifted through the ballroom in silk and diamonds, holding champagne they barely touched. Grace arrived in a plain gray dress and flat shoes. No jewelry, no designer label. She looked, to everyone there, like someone who had wandered in by mistake, but she didn't act like a stranger. At the door, a young server fumbled a tray of glasses. Crystal teetered. Grace caught it without thinking, steadied his hands, and smiled. "You've got it," she whispered. "Breathe." He exhaled like she'd just saved his life. She knew the valet's name. She knew the coat check girl's name, too, and asked about her mother's surgery. She tipped both more than most guests tipped all night. None of them knew who she was. She liked it that way. That was the whole point. Grace had married Daniel Anderson 2 years before. She had never told his family the truth about her own. She wanted to be loved for the woman she was, not the name behind her. So she drove a modest car. She wore quiet clothes. She let them all assume she came from nothing. Daniel found her across the room and laced his fingers through hers. "You okay?" he asked. He always asked. He'd grown up in this house, under his father's thumb, and he hated how cold it could feel. "I'm fine," she said. "It's a beautiful party." "My father's in a mood," Daniel warned softly. "Just stay near me." She squeezed his hand. "I always do." Around them, the conversation was all money. A senator laughed too loud. A banker bragged about a yacht. And under the music, in tight little circles, the executives whispered about something else entirely. Something worried. Anderson Industries was in trouble. Grace caught pieces of it as she passed. One bad quarter from the edge. Everything's riding on the new contract. If the chairman doesn't sign, we're finished. They said the word chairman like a prayer. The partner whose deal would either save the company or sink it. He was flying in that very night. None of them had ever met him. Grace heard all of it. She didn't say a word. She just sipped her water and watched the room glitter. Near the fireplace, Gerald Anderson held court. He was tall, silver-haired, and certain of himself in the way only old money allows. He shook hands like he was granting favors. When his eyes passed over Grace, they went flat and cold, the way you look at a smudge on clean glass. He had decided who she was the moment Daniel brought her home. Poor, beneath them. A mistake he intended to correct. Grace felt the look land. She'd felt it many times. She just lifted her chin a little and let it slide off. Eleanor Anderson, Gerald's wife, floated past in emerald silk. She smiled at Grace the way a cat smiles at something small. "Such a brave little dress," she murmured, and kept walking before Grace could answer. A few nearby guests hid their laughter behind their glasses. Daniel's jaw tightened. Grace touched his arm. "Don't," she said gently. "Not tonight. Tonight's important." She glanced toward the tall front windows. Beyond them, the long driveway curved into the dark, empty and waiting. She checked her phone once, read a message, and slipped it back into her clutch. Whatever it said, it made her shoulders settle. She knew something the whole room didn't. The candles flickered. The quartet found its rhythm. Waiters carried tiny plates of food no one finished. It looked, for one more hour, like a perfect evening among perfect people. The kind of night that ends in a toast and a photograph. But Gerald was already walking toward her, glass in hand, that cold look hardening into something meaner. He had an audience now. He liked an audience. And Grace, calm, quiet, underestimated, had no idea the man she'd been waiting for was already minutes from the gate. Neither did anyone else. The storm was about to walk in through the front door. They just didn't know it yet. Gerald reached her in the center of the room, where the most people could see. "You," he said, loud enough to turn heads. "I want a word." The quartet kept playing, but quieter now. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Grace set down her water and folded her hands. "Of course, Mr. Anderson." "Don't Mr. Anderson me like we're friends." He swirled his glass. "You've been in my family 2 years. 2 years. And in all that time, I've never once seen proof of where you come from." "I've never hidden anything, sir." "No?" He smiled without warmth. "Then where are your people? Where's your money? Where's the family that should be standing here beside you tonight?" Grace held his gaze. They couldn't come. How convenient. A few guests drifted closer, drawn the way people are drawn to a car wreck. Gerald felt them gather. His voice rose to fill the space. "Let me tell you what I see," he said. "I see a girl with no name and no fortune who married into one of the oldest families in this state. I see someone who looked at my son and saw a bank account." "That isn't true," Daniel cut in, stepping beside her. "Dad, stop." "Stay out of this, Daniel. She's my wife." "She's a mistake," Gerald snapped. "And mistakes can be corrected." The word landed hard. Grace didn't flinch, but Daniel's hand found hers and held tight. Gerald turned back to her, slow and deliberate. He was enjoying this now. An audience always brought out his best cruelty. "I had you looked into," he said. Grace's eyes lifted. "You did what?" "You heard me. I hired a man. Quiet, discreet. I wanted to know exactly what crawled into my family." He spread his hands. "And you know what he found? Nothing. No estate, no trust, no history worth a damn. Just a girl who came from nowhere and aimed high." The crowd shifted. Someone whispered. A woman near the fireplace covered a small laugh with her glass. Grace stayed very still. "Your investigator wasn't very good." "My investigator," Gerald said, "is the best money can buy. And money, dear, is the one thing your kind never understands. You only know how to take it." There it was again, your kind. He said it the way other men said a slur, smooth and certain, daring anyone to object. Daniel's voice shook. "Don't talk to her like that." "I'll talk to her however I like. This is my house, my name, my money." Gerald leaned in toward Grace. And you will never have any of it. A waiter passed with a tray. Gerald snapped his fingers without looking. You, stop. The young man froze. Take a good look at this woman. Memorize her face. If she so much as touches anything in this house that isn't hers, I want to know. The waiter's eyes flicked to Grace, full of apology, then dropped to the floor. He hurried away. Gerald wasn't finished. He looked toward a man in a charcoal suit near the bar, his right hand, Walter Brown, who ran the company's books. Walter, he said, first thing tomorrow, I want my son's name off every account. The cards, the car, the apartment, all of it. Today he has a future. Tomorrow he has nothing. Walter shifted on his feet, glanced at Daniel, then gave a slow, reluctant nod. This wasn't a tantrum anymore. It was one signature from real, and everyone in earshot knew it. Grace felt the heat climb her neck. Not anger. Something older and heavier. The weariness of being watched, doubted, treated like a thief in a room she'd done nothing wrong in. She breathed through it. May I sit down, sir? You may leave, Gerald said. That's the only thing I'm offering you. Eleanor appeared at his shoulder, drawn by the noise. She looked Grace up and down with open distaste. Gerald, darling, don't waste your breath, she purred. Girls like this don't hear words. They only hear price tags. She tilted her head. Tell me, sweetheart, what was the plan? Marry the son? Wait for the inheritance? Then disappear with half? There was no plan, Grace said quietly. Of course there wasn't. Eleanor's smile was ice. There never is. The circle of guests had grown. 40, maybe 50 people now, half watching, half pretending not to. Phones had started to appear, held low against expensive dresses, red recording lights blinking like little eyes. Gerald saw them and didn't care. He wanted witnesses. 2 years, he said again, shaking his head. 2 years my son lied to me, brought this into my home, sat her at my table. He pointed at Grace with the hand holding his glass, wine sloshing near the rim. Do you know what people say about us now? The Andersons, who let a nobody wear the family name. I never asked to wear it, Grace said. But you took it. You always take. Daniel stepped fully between them now, shielding her with his body. That's enough. We're leaving. You're not going anywhere. Gerald's voice dropped, low and dangerous. Not until she hears the truth in front of every person here. The room went quiet enough to hear the candles hiss. Here is the truth, Gerald said. You were nothing. You were nothing before my son, and you'll be nothing after him. I built this family from the ground up. I will not watch it handed to some woman who reeks of a life I clawed my way out of. And there it was, the thing underneath all of it. Gerald Anderson had not been born rich. He had spent 40 years terrified of slipping back. Every person he looked down on was a mirror he refused to face. He didn't hate Grace because she was beneath him. He hated her because some buried part of him remembered being there too, not that he'd ever admit it. To Gerald, this was simple. He was protecting his legacy. He was the reasonable one, the hero of his own story, defending 4 generations from a stranger at the gate. Sir, Grace said, and her voice was so calm it cut through the noise. I didn't marry Daniel for your money. I have never touched your money, and I never will. Easy words. They're the only ones I have. Gerald laughed, a short, ugly sound. And you're a fool on top of everything else. He turned to the crowd, performing now. You see? No fight in her, no pride. because she knows what she is. She knows she doesn't belong under this roof, breathing this air, standing on my floors. He looked back at her, and his lip curled. You're not fit to clean them. Somewhere behind him, Eleanor laughed. A few others joined in, thin and nervous. The sound scraped across the room. Grace closed her eyes for 1 second, just one. When she opened them, they were dry and steady. Daniel was shaking with rage. Apologize to her, right now. Apologize? Gerald looked genuinely amazed. To her? She's done nothing but love me. She's done nothing but use you, and you're too blind to see it. Gerald's jaw tightened. But I'll fix that too. Here, tonight, in front of everyone. He raised his glass like a man about to give a toast. The room leaned in. Daniel, he said, you have a choice to make, right now. Her or this family. Her or your name. Her or every dollar that comes with it. Daniel didn't move. Choose carefully, son, because the second you pick that woman, you are no longer an Anderson. No inheritance, no company, no home. You'll have nothing but her, and we both know that's nothing at all. The whole room held its breath. Grace turned to Daniel. Her eyes were soft and a little scared, but not for herself. Whatever you decide, she whispered, I'll understand. I mean it. Daniel looked at his father, then at the silver-haired guests waiting to watch him crumble, then at Grace, at the woman who knew every server's name and had never once asked him for a thing. I don't need a second to think, Daniel said. Gerald's smile widened, certain of his win. I choose her, Daniel said. I'll always choose her. The smile froze on Gerald's face. A gasp moved through the crowd. Eleanor's glass stopped halfway to her lips. For one heartbeat, Gerald simply stared, as if he hadn't understood the words. Then his face went dark red, the color climbing from his collar to his hairline. Then get out, he said, voice trembling with fury. Both of you, out of my house, out of my family. You're dead to me, Daniel. You hear me? Dead. Grace took her husband's hand. She did not cry. She did not argue. She simply lowered her eyes, the way she always did when the cruelty got loud, and turned toward the door. But she didn't head for the exit. She walked toward the tall front windows instead, toward the long, dark driveway, where a pair of headlights had just swung through the gate. Grace stopped at the window. Outside, the headlights swept up the long drive and slowed. Gerald saw her looking and mistook it for defiance. Did you not hear me? He barked. I said get out. Use the door like a normal person, not my windows. I'm waiting for someone, Grace said softly. You're waiting for nothing. You have nothing. He stepped closer, the wine trembling in his glass. Walk out now before I have you removed. That was when Eleanor screamed. It was a small, theatrical sound, one hand flying to her bare wrist. My bracelet, she gasped. It's gone. My grandmother's diamonds. They were right here. The room turned. Eleanor's eyes locked onto Grace like a trap snapping shut. She was standing next to me. She touched my arm not 10 minutes ago. I felt it. Eleanor's voice climbed. She took it. This little thief took it. I never touched you, Grace said. Her calm only made it worse. Liar! Eleanor turned to the crowd, performing now. I knew it. The second she walked in, I knew. You let people like her into your home, and this is what happens. Gerald's face lit with something ugly and satisfied. He finally had what he wanted. Not just a poor girl to mock, a criminal to catch. Curtis, he called. A broad man in a dark suit stepped out of the shadows near the wall. Curtis Moore, ran security for the estate. He had an earpiece and the flat, careful eyes of a man who followed orders. "Sir, this woman has stolen from my wife. Search her." Moore hesitated, just for a second. "Sir, I'd need her to—" "I don't care what you need. This is my house. Search her bag, now." The whole room had gone silent. Somewhere, a glass clinked against a tray. The candles threw long shadows across the marble, and every one of them seemed to point at Grace. She looked at Curtis Moore. He looked back, uncomfortable, but his hand was already reaching. "You don't have to do this," Grace told him quietly. "He doesn't have a choice," Gerald snapped. "Bag. Open it." Grace's jaw tightened. For the first time all night, something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear, but a deep, tired anger. She had been here before. Not this room, but this moment. Hands reaching for her things. Strangers deciding she was guilty before a single question. She held out her small clutch. Moore reached for it gently, almost apologetically, but Grace still felt every eye in the room crawl over her skin. A grown woman, searched like a suspect at a black tie party. The shame of it was never hers to carry. Somehow, it always landed on her shoulders anyway. He opened it slowly, in front of everyone, and turned it over. A phone, a folded tissue, a tube of lip balm, a single house key. He shook it once, twice. Nothing fell out but a stick of gum. No bracelet.
The silence changed shape. A few guests glanced at each other.
"Check again," Eleanor demanded. Moore checked again. He ran a thumb along the lining. He held the empty clutch upside down and shook it hard. Still, nothing. "There's nothing here, Mrs. Anderson," he said carefully. "Then she hid it. On her. Check her coat. Check her—" "That's enough!" Daniel exploded. He lunged forward, and a second guard caught him by the shoulders and held him back. "Get your hands off her things! She didn't take anything!" "Hold him," Gerald said coldly. "Dad, hold him." The guard's hands clamped down. Daniel strained against them, jaw clenched, but he couldn't break free. Grace caught his eye and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not yet," it said. "Wait for it." Grace stood very still in the middle of it all. 200 people watched. Phones recorded. A guard gripped her husband. Another held her open purse. And the host of the party stared at her with open hatred, daring her to cry. She didn't. "Sir," she said, and her voice carried clean across the room, "your wife's bracelet is on the side table by the fireplace. She set it down when she fixed her earring. I watched her do it an hour ago." Every head turned toward the fireplace. There, glinting in the candlelight on a small marble table, sat a circle of diamonds. Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed. A footman walked over, lifted the bracelet, and held it up for the room to see. It caught the light and scattered it across the ceiling. A ripple of unease moved through the guests. A few looked away, ashamed to have watched it happen. One older woman near the bar set down her glass and quietly reached for her coat. Whatever this party had been, it had curdled into something none of them wanted to be filmed standing near. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Grace had been accused, searched, and paraded in front of 200 people. And she had been right. She had been right the whole time. But Gerald Anderson did not apologize. Men like him never do. Not when they're losing. "That proves nothing," he said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "She could have planned to take it later. People like her always have an angle." "People like her," Daniel said, low and shaking, still held by the guard. Say it plainer, Dad. Say what you actually mean.
I mean exactly what I say. Gerald turned on his son. She is beneath us. She always will be. And you have thrown your entire life away for a woman who doesn't even own a decent pair of shoes. He stepped close to Grace, so close she could smell the wine on his breath, and lowered his voice to something almost gentle. Somehow, that was worse. I am going to make sure you leave here with nothing, he murmured. No husband, no name, no money. I'll bury you in lawyers until you forget you ever met this family. Do you understand me? You picked the wrong house to climb into. Grace looked up at him. She was not crying. She was not shaking. When she spoke, her voice was steady and almost kind. No, Mr. Anderson, she said. You picked the wrong woman to humiliate. Something in her tone made him pause, just for a heartbeat. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, there and gone, like a draft moving a candle flame. Then he laughed it off. Is that a threat? From you? He shook his head. You don't have the power to threaten anyone in this room. I don't need power, Grace said. I just need to wait. Outside, a car door shut. Firm, unhurried. The sound carried through the tall windows into the silent ballroom. Footsteps followed, slow and even, crunching across the gravel toward the front steps. Gerald didn't notice. He was still glaring at Grace, still drunk on his own cruelty. But Curtis Moore did. His earpiece had crackled to life, and whatever he heard made his eyebrows lift. He touched the earpiece. Say that again, he murmured. He listened. His face changed. Sir, Moore said quietly. Gerald ignored him. Sir, louder now. What? Gerald spun around. What could possibly be so important? There's a car at the front steps, Moore swallowed. A man's coming in. He says he's here for Grace. Gerald snorted. Then throw him out with her, whoever he is. I don't... Sir, Moore's voice had gone strange, tight. I think you're going to want to see this man yourself. The tall front doors swung open. Cold night air rolled into the ballroom, guttering the nearest candles. The quartet stopped playing. 200 guests turned toward the entrance as one. A man stepped through the doorway. He was older, calm, dressed in a plain dark coat with no tie and no jewelry. Nothing to mark him as anyone at all. He moved without hurry, the way a man moves when he has never once been told to wait. His eyes swept the room slowly, taking in the guards, the open purse, the bracelet in the footman's hand, his daughter standing in the center of it all. And his face, until that moment so calm, went very, very cold. He didn't look angry, exactly. He looked like a man reading the last page of a book he had already finished. He paused beside Grace, rested one hand lightly on her shoulder, and she let out a breath she had been holding for 2 long hours. Up close, there was a stillness to him that made the loud, glittering room feel suddenly very small. Gerald looked at the stranger and saw exactly what he expected to see. A nobody. A plain man in a plain coat. Another person beneath him. He had no idea he was looking at the one man who could erase everything he owned. And who, Gerald sneered, is this supposed to be? The man said nothing yet. He just walked forward, slow and steady, into the brightest part of the room. The man kept walking, and Eleanor, of all people, made the first mistake. She saw a plain coat, she saw dark skin, she saw a man without a tie at her party, and her brain filled in the rest before her eyes could correct it. Excuse me. She stepped into his path, lifting her wine like a barrier. The staff entrance is around the back. You don't just walk through the front like you own the...
she flicked her wrist. A long splash of red wine arced through the air and soaked down the front of his coat. The room gasped. The man stopped. He looked down at the stain spreading across his chest. Then he looked up at Eleanor, and he smiled.
It was not an angry smile. It was worse than that. It was the calm, patient smile of a man who has just been handed the last piece of evidence he needed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That's very helpful." Eleanor blinked, thrown. What?" He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, dabbed the stain once, and tucked it away as if nothing at all had happened. The whole time, his eyes stayed on the room, watching, counting, remembering faces. That was when Walter Brown went white. The CFO had been hovering near the bar, phone in hand, half watching the chaos. Now he stared at the man in the wine-stained coat, and the color drained out of his face like water from a cracked glass. "Oh my God," Walter whispered. "Walter," Gerald snapped, "what is it?" Walter didn't answer. He took a step forward, then stopped, then took off his glasses and put them back on, as if he didn't trust his own eyes. "Mr. Davis?" he said, and his voice cracked on the name. "Chairman Davis?" The room went still. "Sir, I had no idea you were coming tonight. Nobody told us. If we'd known..." "You weren't meant to know," the man said. "I wanted to see this family the way they are when they think no one important is watching." Gerald's smile flickered. "Davis? Who the hell is Davis? Walter, what are you?" Walter turned to his boss, and he looked like a man watching a building come down.
"Gerald," he said. "That's Harrison Davis, chairman and founder of Davis Global. The contract." He swallowed hard. "The $1.5 billion contract. The one keeping us alive. He owns it. He owns us." The words hit the ballroom like a dropped tray. A murmur swept through the guests, fast and electric. Phones turned. The senator, who'd laughed too loud an hour ago, suddenly looked very interested in his shoes.
Gerald's face had gone slack. No, that's impossible. He came in a plain coat. He has no entourage. He
doesn't need one," Walter said. Harrison Davis finally turned his full attention on Gerald, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees.
"You're right," Harrison said. "I came quietly. I came in an old coat. I didn't announce myself, and I didn't bring a single guard." His voice stayed even, almost gentle. "I wanted to know what kind of man my daughter married into." The word landed in the silence like a stone in a still pond. Daughter. Every head turned to Grace. She stood beside Harrison now, calm and steady, his hand still resting on her shoulder. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Gerald's mouth opened. No sound came out. "You spent your whole evening telling my daughter she was nothing," Harrison went on. "You called her trash. You said she crawled in because she smelled money. You had your man search her like a criminal in front of 200 people. He tilted his head. "Did I miss anything?" Gerald's lips moved. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There hasn't," Harrison said. "I heard it all from the driveway. The windows were open." The blood was leaving Gerald's face now, draining from his cheeks to his collar. His hand groped behind him for the back of a chair and gripped it, white-knuckled. He understood, finally, what he had done. He had screamed at, searched, and disowned the daughter of the one man on earth who held his entire empire in his hands. The contract, the company, the 4 generations of name he'd been so desperate to protect. All of it ran straight through the quiet man in the wine-stained coat. "You can't," Gerald's voice came out thin and reedy. "You wouldn't pull the contract. It would destroy us. Thousands of jobs, the whole company.
You can't. I can, Harrison said simply, and you've spent the last hour showing me exactly why I should. Gerald swayed. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the chair, then lost it, and sank down onto the cold marble floor he'd been so proud of. The floor he'd told Grace she wasn't fit to clean.
He sat there in his $1,000 suit, pale and shaking, while 200 guests stared and 100 phones recorded every second of it.
Get up, Gerald, Eleanor hissed, frozen with the empty wine glass still in her hand. Get up. But Gerald couldn't get up. The most powerful man in the room had just walked through his front door in a plain coat. And the empire that took 40 years to build was about to come down in a single night.
For a moment, no one moved. Then the scrambling began.
Eleanor recovered first. She set down her glass and rushed toward Harrison with a bright, desperate smile, the same smile she gave donors and photographers. Mr. Davis, this is all just a silly mix-up, she gushed. The lighting in here is terrible. I never would have... your coat. I'll have it cleaned, of course. And Grace, well, Grace has always been like a daughter to us. Stop, Harrison said. Not loud, just final. Eleanor stopped. Gerald struggled to his feet, gripping the chair. His voice came out shaky and small. Listen, Harrison... May I call you Harrison? We're reasonable men. Whatever was said tonight, it got out of hand. A few heated words. We can fix this. Privately. A few heated words, Harrison repeated. Yes, exactly. Harrison looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The wine stain on his coat had gone dark, like old blood.
My daughter married your son 2 years ago, Harrison said.
2 years. In that time, she never once told you who I was. Do you know why?
Gerald said nothing.
Because she wanted to be loved for herself. Not my money, not my name. So she wore plain dresses and drove a plain car and let you all believe whatever you wanted. Harrison's voice never rose. She gave you 2 years to show her 1 ounce of kindness. And tonight, when you thought she was poor and powerless, you showed her exactly who you are. He turned slowly, taking in the whole silent room. And now, he said, everyone knows. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply dialed a number and lifted it to his ear. And somehow, that calm was more terrifying than any rage could have been. It's me, Harrison said into the phone. The Anderson contract. The $1.5 billion. Freeze it, tonight. Effective immediately. Begin termination, first thing in the morning. A pause. Yes, I'm sure. I'll explain when I'm back. He hung up. Gerald made a sound like the air had been punched out of him. You can't just... That's thousands of jobs. That's the whole... You should have thought about your thousands of jobs, Harrison said, before you searched my daughter like a thief. The room had become a wall of glowing screens. Every phone was up now, openly recording, the guards no longer pretending to stop anyone. The night had already escaped the walls of the house. It was somewhere else now, multiplying, unstoppable.
Walter Brown stepped quietly away from Gerald, putting space between himself and the man who had just sunk the company. He was already thinking about the board, about the morning, about saving whatever could still be saved. Curtis Moore had let go of Daniel and stepped back, hands open at his sides, the look of a man realizing he'd followed the wrong order in front of 200 witnesses. Daniel crossed the room and pulled Grace into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "For all of it. For him." "It was never you," she said. "You chose me. That's all I ever needed." Harrison watched them, and for the first time that night,
His hard face softened. He put a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You stood between her and your own father," Harrison said, "when you thought you'd lose everything for it. I won't forget that, son." Gerald watched the three of them, this little circle of warmth he would never be part of, and something in him broke. Not with rage, with understanding. He had been handed a daughter-in-law worth more than his entire fortune, and he had spent the night spitting on her. "Please," he said hoarsely. "Harrison, there has to be something I can—" But Harrison had already turned away. "We're leaving," he told Grace gently. "All of us. Together." And as they walked toward the tall doors, the cold night air rushing in to meet them, Gerald Anderson stood alone in the middle of his glittering ballroom, surrounded by 200 guests, and more alone than he had ever been in his life. The fall had only just begun. By sunrise, the whole country had seen it. The videos went up before the gala even ended. 200 guests, 100 phones, and not one of them on Gerald's side. By morning, the clips had been stitched together, captioned, and shared millions of times. The headline wrote itself: "Billionaire disowns son, humiliates black guest," who turned out to be his biggest partner's daughter. People watched Gerald scream the word trash. They watched a grown woman searched like a thief over a bracelet sitting in plain sight. They watched a man in a plain coat say 5 quiet words: "I heard it all," and bring an empire to its knees. The internet did what the internet does. It found Gerald's old interviews, where he called himself a self-made man of values. It found Eleanor's charity galas, her speeches about kindness. It set them beside the footage of wine splashing down a stranger's coat, and the contrast was merciless. Anderson Industries opened on the stock market that morning and dropped like a stone. By noon, shares were down nearly 40%. By the closing bell, the company had lost billions in value. Partners who'd spent years shaking Gerald's hand suddenly couldn't be reached. 2 more clients pulled their orders before lunch. The phones at headquarters rang, and no answer made anything better. Inside the glass tower, the board of directors called an emergency meeting. They gathered around a long table while the city moved on below them. At the head sat Catherine Taylor, the board chair, sharp, silver-haired, and done. She had warned Gerald for years that his temper would cost them. Now, it had cost them everything. "There's no version of this we survive with him at the top," she said. "The footage is everywhere. The contract is gone. Every hour he stays CEO, we bleed." Gerald sat at the far end, gray and hollow, still in yesterday's clothes. "Catherine, 40 years I built this. You can't just—" "We can," she said, echoing words he'd heard once before. "And the vote's already counted." It wasn't close. The board removed Gerald Anderson as chief executive and stripped him of his seat that same afternoon. The man who had spent his life terrified of losing his place lost all of it in a single day. Not to a stranger, not to bad luck, but to his own voice, captured on 200 phones. Walter Brown was named interim chief. His first call was to Harrison Davis. He did not get the contract back. But he got a meeting, which was more than Gerald would ever get again. The legal fallout came next, and it came hard. Grace had not screamed. She had not thrown anything. But what had been done to her had names in a courtroom. A lawyer laid them out plainly. Unlawful detention, false imprisonment, the forced search of her belongings without consent or cause. Curtis Moore had gripped her husband. A guard had held him back. All of it on film. Grace filed a civil suit. She did not ask for vengeance. She asked for the record to say, in writing, what had happened. The Anderson family settled within weeks. The amount was sealed, but the apology was not. It was entered into the public court record, signed, undeniable. For a family whose whole religion was image, the paper trail was its own kind of sentence. Curtis Moore faced charges of his own for the unlawful detention. Facing real consequences, he did the math fast. He testified that he had warned Gerald, that he had said he needed consent, and that Gerald had told him he didn't care. The recording backed every word. Moore kept his freedom by telling the truth he should have told that night. Eleanor did not escape either. Throwing a full glass of wine in a man's face has a name too, and Harrison's lawyers used it. Rather than fight a case the whole world had already watched, Eleanor settled, with a formal, written apology read aloud and filed for the record. The woman who had sneered about a brave little dress had to put her name under the words, "I was wrong." The country watched all of it land, and it did not look away. News anchors played the footage on a loop. Panels argued about it for days. Strangers began recognizing Grace in the grocery store and simply nodded at her. The small, quiet nod people give someone who has been through something and come out the other side, still standing. Gerald's clubs quietly revoked his memberships. The board seats he held at 3 charities asked for his resignation. Invitations stopped coming. The name Anderson, 4 generations old, became something else overnight. A punchline, a warning, a clip people sent each other with the caption, "Watch what happens at the end." He had wanted to protect his legacy. In one night, he had become it, just not the way he'd planned. And through all of it, Grace stayed quiet. She gave no interviews. She posted nothing. When reporters camped outside, she made them coffee and asked them, gently, to please give the family room. Her silence said more than any statement could. She had never wanted a spectacle. She had only wanted, for 2 years, to be treated like a person. The world had simply caught up to what she'd known all along.
Harrison made one public comment, and only one. A reporter shouted a question as he left a building downtown, whether the contract would ever come back. Harrison stopped. He looked into the cameras, calm as ever, the way he'd looked at a room full of people who thought he was no one. "I don't do business," he said, "with men who measure people by the price of their shoes. That's not punishment. That's just good sense."
Then he got in his car and drove away. And the clip of those 2 sentences went around the world by dinner. Anderson Industries did not die. Companies rarely do. But it shrank. It restructured. It survived only after new leadership signed reforms it should have had all along. A real ethics office, real consequences. A written promise that no employee or guest would ever again be searched or detained on one man's word. The cost of those reforms had a face, and his name was Gerald. Somewhere in a smaller house now, with the news muted and the phone unplugged, Gerald Anderson sat alone and watched a video of himself he could not unsee. The marble floor, the wine, the quiet man in the plain coat. He had been right about one thing, in the end. Someone in that ballroom hadn't belonged. It just wasn't Grace. It was him. 6 months later, almost nothing about Grace had changed. She still drove the same modest car. She still wore plain dresses. She still knew the name of every server at every restaurant and tipped them like they'd saved her life. The money had always been there, behind her, her whole life. She had simply never needed it to know who she was. Daniel changed, though. He stood taller now. The fear he'd carried around his father his whole life was gone, burned away the moment he chose Grace in front of 200 people and didn't lose her. He gained a family that actually felt like one. He went to work for Harrison's company, and not as a favor, he earned it. Started near the bottom and learned the business the way his wife had always wanted to be treated, on merit, not on a name. Harrison watched his daughter and her husband build a quiet, good life, and he was at peace. He never gloated about that night. He didn't need to. He had walked into a room full of people who decided he was nothing, and he had let them be exactly who they were. That was the whole lesson. He never had to raise his voice to teach it. Anderson Industries survived under new leadership, smaller and humbled, with rules written in the blood of one man's pride. Walter Brown ran it carefully now. The first thing he did was tear out the old security policy that let a guest be searched on one man's word. He framed a copy of the new one and hung it by the door where everyone could see it. And Gerald lived quietly now, in a smaller house with a name that opened no doors. Sometimes, late at night, he'd start to type an apology to Grace. He never sent one. Some part of him understood that the only apology that mattered was the one he'd refused to give when it could have changed everything. When she was standing in his ballroom, calm and kind, asking only to be left alone. He'd had a daughter-in-law worth more than his entire fortune, and he threw her away because of the color of her skin and the price of her shoes. That was the part that would haunt him, not the money. The kindness he was offered and spat on again and again, while it stood right in front of him. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. The story you just heard is made up. Grace, Gerald, the gala, none of it is real. But the feeling at the center of it absolutely is. The humiliation of walking into a room and being judged before you say a single word. The assumption that you took something, that you don't belong, that you're less. That part isn't fiction. It happens every single day to real people in real rooms. And most of the time, there's no billionaire father waiting outside in a black car. There's no contract to cancel, no perfect twist, no 200 phones catching it all. Most of the time, the person being treated like Grace just has to swallow it and walk home. So the real test was never Gerald's. It was everyone else's. The 40 guests who watched and laughed. The ones who looked away. The ones who recorded but never stepped in. Because that's the part of the story we actually get to choose. In our own lives. In our own rooms. Now I want to hear from you. If you'd been standing in that ballroom before anyone knew who Grace was, would you have spoken up? Or would you have stayed quiet and watched? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments. I read them. And if this story moved you, do me a favor. Like it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe